Welcome to this exclusive news series. The Revival Project is becoming one of the fastest growing campaigns for unity between Jews in the diaspora and Israel. Its founder and CEO David Bannister introduces the first episode aptly called, "Do We Need to Strengthen Bonds Between Israel and the Diaspora?"
Is there actually a need for strengthening bonds between Jews in the diaspora and Israel? And one could even expand that between Jews living in the diaspora and Jews living in Israel at the same time. This is quite a perplexing sort of question, and it's one which, in my opinion, at least deserves a little bit of exploration to see whether there is actually a need, and if there is, how can it be resolved? I am David Bannister. I am the founder and CEO of the Revival Project. The Revival Project actually is involved with trying to strengthen bonds between Jews in the diaspora and Israel. And hence, one can now understand the reason why I'm introducing this subject. But we're adding a little bit of a challenge to this because we want to try to strengthen bonds without actually getting involved in political or religious issues. That obviously sounds a little bit of an impossibility. Probably nearly most of the issues which face Jews in trying to get together are of a political or a religious nature. How on earth can we even begin to try to find a way around that? Let's go on a little bit more and see if we can find some answer to that. Israel is heading for its 75th anniversary very soon, next year, 2023. That's come so quickly, hasn't it? How incredible is that, really, when you consider that just a short while before the first Independence Day, Israel's very existence was in question. Jews worldwide are also struggling to maintain their own identity, while the tide of anti-Semitism threatens their very existence. In one sense, it's like the story of Israel's birth pangs is being adapted for, God forbid, a more morbid outcome for those living in the Jewish diaspora. On one side, we had Jews in Israel struggling to build up the Jewish homeland, and meanwhile, on the other side of the equation, we have forces moving against Jews living in their own homeland overseas. Well, is it possible or even desirable to stem this relentless onslaught against our kin in foreign lands? I say desirable because the view from outside looking in at our lives in Israel is often clouded with misinformation and even blind hatred against the existence of an entity that runs counter to the idea that Jews can belong in a diaspora. I mean, in that sense, really, I guess Israel, the very existence of a Jewish homeland outside of the diaspora, is possibly perceived as a threat in some places. Accordingly, the question of it being possible to do something positive, really positive, to help our brothers in distress in the diaspora is somewhat also dependent upon the same recipients being receptive to such assistance. Meanwhile, sadly, as usual, many Jews do a great job of turning against each other. Despite the fact that Reform, Conservative, Progressive, you name it, other less orthodox streams of Judaism include those considered fully Jewish from the most fundamental of Jewish laws, and yes, there are fully Jewish children in all of these movements, but the mere membership of an alternative branch of religious adherents marks them as an enemy by many followers of Orthodox Judaism. But this is not a one-way situation. Leaders of these same sects equally target the Orthodox. I stress leaders, as by its very definition, being a follower means having to follow a leadership. Where does that leave those in between whose feelings of animosity is sometimes something which stems from an external source, in this case, another branch of Judaism perhaps? It is often overlooked that these same followers are raised in an environment that encourages them to strongly feel the pangs of bitterness towards those raised in other Jewish sects. And so, the righteous justification of their cause grows without restraint. Where has this led us? The Jewish hatred against other Jews has led to previously unheard of depths of depravity. Jewish settlers are demonized based on their own faith and geographical location. Facts on the ground, like the thousands of innocent babies that also happen to be raised in Jewish settlements, which makes them settlers, of course. The unrecorded good deeds that include settlers enjoying, almost God forbid, many might say this is really terrible, but some enjoy friendly relations with local Arabs, and much more. These things get conveniently left out of the dialogue from those preaching another form of Judaism and trying to justify their demonization process of Jews living in settlements or religious Jews or whatever. On the other hand, some in the right wing often regard the act of actually being on the right wing almost as a religion of its own. That leads to demonizing Jews who belong to the same sects as those who demonize them. And also that we know that it extends to Jews on the left, the right, the middle, progressive, you name it. Everyone is at everyone's throats. What a wonderful way to live. Therefore, is being a member of an alternative Jewish culture in itself part of a double-edged sword that tears our people apart from within? Let's not hold our punches. We'll take a typical situation. The gay lesbian movement, however they call it, is perhaps one example of how membership of an entity can render the individual lives of its followers secondary to that of the movement. It has always been a known fact that adolescence involves experimentation, a journey of self-discovery, which should not be harnessed and sidelined to suit the goals of politically minded leaders. But this is precisely what happens. Each person has the right of choice, and that includes experimentation. It also includes their Jewish birthright that, fully explored, can lead to another more conventional lifestyle. But unfortunately and very sadly, many of these same children are young, are being held back in such movements. These same followers are also trapped in a movement that can only thrive by holding their subjects to a concept that begs for not only universal acceptance, but like most us and them environments, a need to undermine anything that is not part of their own homemade culture. Accordingly, Orthodox Jews only see the external facade of these movements, while simultaneously despising and demonizing its followers, regardless of the individual lives trapped inside such movements. Conversely, those trapped in these movements are denied the chance to explore Jewish concepts about sexual issues, both from within and also from without, by those passing harsh judgment. Next, what of really external issues that can affect all the above-mentioned movements, however remotely associated with Judaism? The Holocaust taught us well. Jews of all persuasions, homosexuals, progressives, Orthodox, right, left, among others deemed as society's outcasts, all shared the same tragic fate. And today, despite many fringe Jewish groups aligning their cause with declared enemies of Israel, they too are targeted by the same bedmates based on showing any form of Jewish identity in the first place. Then, like any person with their back to the wall, they seek a way out through associating more with their prosecutors by going to new extremes of justification for their self-righteous beliefs than they would otherwise. This, my friends, is the foundation of the anti-Semitic versus the anti-Zionist dialogue. There are those Jews in the diaspora who blame Israel for their predicament. many stating with righteous indignation that the state of Israel is actually the root cause of anti-Semitism in the first place. Ouch. And so the schism grows. Returning to our initial line of inquiry, while we haven't yet fully addressed the original question, if there's a need for strengthening bonds between Jews in the diaspora and Israel, we have more than determined the undisputed fact that there is clearly disunity between Jews throughout the world. No prizes for coming to that obvious conclusion. Turning our attention to how things could improve if there did exist better communication in this area, the way is littered with tripwires that could make a minefield seem like a walk through a picnic site. Why would that be the case? Every attempt at even trying to gather entrenched contestants together can also backfire, placing the participant in such a venture exposed to ridicule and even exile from their own home camp. I can almost hear many thinking aloud about the need to keep adversaries in a state of exile, doomed to suffer a bitter fate for not sharing their own values. How can one even dare to venture outside of their home camp to court the interest of enemies, to try and even negotiate with dedicated enemies? But surely such an attitude goes against many Torah precepts. For example, we are commanded not to harbor a grudge against a fellow Jew. We are also commanded to help a Jewish enemy who stumbles under a heavy load. Not to help just once, but repeatedly. There is an exception to that latter command, which states that we should help him together with his own efforts to help himself. Is this sounding familiar? We earlier mentioned potential reluctance by our brothers in the diaspora to receive help from those living in Israel, and of course vice versa. Like the virus plaguing our lives at the moment, we are cast further apart from each other. And this happens at a time when our obsession with the internet compounds any attempt to connect with others. Unless it's over the internet as well. That reminds me of a subtle joke. There were two Englishmen who passed each other in the desert. One called out, "Hey, you!" And the other one looked around, pointed to himself and said, "Who, me?" That's sort of English humour. There's a point as well which I'm trying to make here is that I don't know if any of you have actually seen a child with their parents and their parents are busy on the internet, texting, doing whatever they do, and the child's tugging away for attention. I don't know about you, but that really saddens me when I see that happening because really it's time drifting by and you can't make it up again. It just vanishes. What sort of effect does it have on a child as they grow up? And maybe it pushes them further away from others as they get even further immersed in their own internet voyage and ventures. Maybe that's a price for the age we're living in at the moment. Maybe also that has something to do with the vast discord between Jews living in the diaspora and Israel in terms of isolating themselves, where it's not really necessary to do so. I would really like to bring some warmth and human essence back into the equation, but I'm drifting off topic here a little bit. Having made the salient point about the obvious difficulties in trying to bring us closer together, I feel obliged to return to the question how things could improve in that process. In a sense, I feel that it's almost insulting to my audience to pose such a rhetorical question. Surely, there is no such question, and it's obvious that there will be improvements. But hold on, if it was so obvious, how comes that we are still so irreconcilable? Accordingly, allow me to address the question of how it could improve our lives. First, many might think in simple terms of bringing Jews together based on those they share something solid with. For example, family, friends left behind in the diaspora, previous community members, and so on. on a personal level, I have members of family, friends who I'd dearly love to see settle in Israel. But is there really such a wide gap here, other than a geographical one? What I have so far outlined involves those whose very political or religious views are that much removed from our own that for all intents and purposes we live on separate planets. We are accordingly alienated from each other, just like beings from another world. I hope you're up for a challenge, because this is one hell of a one. Do you recall mention of the revival theme? Something about strengthening bonds between Jews in the diaspora and Israel without getting tripped up in religious or political issues? Let's explore some really simple ways that a dialogue can progress. Where I grew up, there were 200 children in my infant school. 199 were not Jewish. And that same 199 supported our local football team, Chelsea. I supported Arsenal and never once got into an argument over religion. Do you have pet likes? Maybe a Netflix series? A hobby? Well, let's not venture further. Of course, the short answer has to be yes. And of course, you are able to enjoy some form of casual and warm communication with others who share your passion, regardless of their political or religious beliefs. Because that's not part of the agenda, really, is it? Now picture again those Jews we've placed in exile and imagine having a conversation with each other based on a favorite subject. Easy peasy, right? Yes, Lionel Messi should never have left playing soccer for Barcelona. It was an outrage. Oh, did you mention something about praying on a moving bus driven by a left-wing gay fanatic last Shabbat? No, it doesn't really happen like that in real life. We're all capable, more than capable, of having simple conversations, simple communication with others, without getting worked up about political or religious issues. What it comes down to is, really, doesn't it feel good just making agreeable connections with others? And how much more so when we each share our own love for an entity called Judaism, and especially Israel. Baby steps can go a long way, a lifetime in fact. We've just learnt simple ways to improve the atmosphere, and being raised in London, if it wasn't for the atmosphere bringing constant rain, there was nothing else to talk to each other about. Having identified a problem, it's time to explore a solution. I, for one, firmly believe in the need for gathering together our people and strengthening the bonds between Jews in the diaspora and Israel. One could rightfully say there's too much dividing us, so why even bother in the first place? Yes, there is some truth in that. But are you ready for more words of wisdom in English folklore? Well, maybe some of you might know the difference between an optimist and a pessimist, but I wonder how many actually know of the difference between an optimist and a pessimist when there's a bag of horse dung sitting between them. Well, the pessimist would open up the bag. He'd look inside, turn his head away a little bit because of the horrible smell, and say, there's nothing but horse dung in here. What of the optimist? Well, the optimist would look in. He'd turn his head as well, but he'd look in again and said, you know what? With all this horse dung in here, there has to be a horse somewhere. What I get from that is the fact that we go through life, as I'm the eternal optimist, I should let you know, and also pragmatic as well. But as we go through, yes, we do see a lot of horse dung and other things in our life, but let's not dwell on that. But the thing is it's always that feeling that that even in the darkest moments, there's always that glimmer of light. There's always that possibility to actually see things to get things right. And when one returns to the pessimistic approach, the attitude of why even bother? Well, there's another saying as well, and that is, for losers, there's only excuses. For winners, there are only ways. Seriously, I think you should use that one when it comes to marketing and in any endeavor you're trying to put together, because there is something in that. So, can we really say why even bother when we've just given some pretty simple examples of how people can connect And I mentioned at the very beginning, in terms of our revival theme, the key takeaway with it is that we're looking at bringing together Jews in the diaspora and Israel, focusing on the Diamond Jubilee event, and also being very, very careful to avoid political and religious issues. Can it be done? Of course it can. We're just giving a simple example. I'm sure you can make a simple dialogue with people who are not Jewish, who are Jewish just through other interests in life. And surely the interest of a birthday party, a celebration, a World Cup football match, anything like that, there has to be many, many ways of approaching the subject without having to get involved in the actual individual, the followers themselves, because really the content is inside there, and the content in Israel is something which is very ancient, very, very stable, and has been with us for thousands of years. And if we approach it correctly, then it is possible to have events and activities which are centered around the birthday child Israel. And this is exactly what the Revival Project is involved with. And this is also the reason why we feel very confident about getting the right results. Hopefully, having got your attention so far, I'm looking forward to explaining how this can be accomplished. But this isn't the end of the story. This is really part of the beginning. Meanwhile, just bear in mind our slogan, which is, we're getting it together. I look forward to getting your comments, and hopefully you have a chance also to visit us on the diasporatrail.com. And at the bottom of that page, the home page, and every page actually, there are links to our social media platforms as well, which are pretty new for us. So we'll also welcome your comments there as well, and hopefully we'll get a chance to enjoy your company again in the near future. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast and sharing the vision with us.